Hi there, this is Andrew, the founder of Collab Lab, and I am here to talk to you about what questions you can ask interviewers when you're interviewing for a job. So um, it's super important for you to also interview the company that you're talking to. It's not a one-way street. You want to find a place that's going to allow you to grow and thrive. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of a process you can go through to come up with some good questions to kind of make yourself look good in the interview, but also get the information that you need to make a good assessment of whether it's a place that you want to work. So, so the format here is, there's this video you're watching. I'll give you a little bit of homework to do after you watch the video, and then we'll have a short Q&A session in a couple of days where you can ask any questions that came up about anything you heard here, and maybe share some of the questions that you came up with and get some feedback on. So, all right, with that, let's get started. So yeah, why is it important for you to ask good questions in an interview? So one of the things that it does is it shows the interviewers that you are engaged and interested in the role. So if you come in having done your homework and prepared with some good questions, it's gonna make a good impression on them. So that's one reason. And then the other thing is that unfortunately not all workplaces are created equally. So some places are really set up to help you grow and thrive, and other places might have not as great a cultures. Maybe they're not as kind of buttoned up in terms of being organized, or could even be a toxic workplace. So this is your chance to ensure that you're joining a place that's going to kind of set you up for success. So the thing I would ask you to do is to reflect on positive and negative experiences that you've had in other jobs before. So write down a list of helpful and harmful aspects of those workplaces. So this could have had to do with your manager, maybe the organization's leadership, the product or the service being provided, your coworkers, your team's processes, or just expectations that they had of you. So, some places they don't have a lot of expectations and not a lot of structure. In some places, the expectations are really high, or just you're expected to put in a lot of extra time, all those kinds of things. So yeah, just think back to previous jobs you've had, or previous experiences working in groups and things even, and think about like what were things that you liked about that, things that helped you, and what were things that were not so helpful. So once you've done that, you can try to come up with questions that will help you identify whether this place that you're interviewing with is going to fall on that sort of helpful end of the spectrum or the harmful end of the spectrum. So now a couple of tips for creating your questions. Don't focus too much on the negative. Like there's a way to word your questions so that it, you're giving them a chance to tell you a positive story, right? So you want to suss out whether it's going to be a harmful workplace or otherwise it's not a good fit, but as much as possible, do that through sort of positively framed questions. So the questions that you ask tell the interview something about you too. So if your questions are too negative, it might kind of give them the wrong impression. So develop your questions, consider developing your questions in sort of the following areas. So the product or service that the company provides, the team, and then the company itself. So for the product or service, it's good to show that you're curious about what the company offers, and not just looking to land sort of the first job that you can. So you might ask something like, can you tell me more about the company's product? It's good if you've done some homework and maybe there are more specific things you can dive into, but showing an interest in that, I think, is really helpful. Now, a really big one is the team. So the team includes your manager and your future colleagues, right? You'll be spending a lot of time with them. So you want to dig in to get an idea of what it's going to be like to work with them. So something you might ask the hiring manager is, how would you describe your management style? This is a totally legitimate question. Any good manager will have a good answer for this. It's funny, I've interviewed hundreds of developers over the years, and only a small handful of times has anybody ever asked me this question. And when they do, to me, it's a really good sign. They're thinking about what our relationship is going to be like, so I think it's a great question to ask. And then if you're interviewing with people who are going to be your teammates, or just colleagues, sort of, other people at sort of the same level as you. You can ask some things like, what do you like most about working for the company? What would you change if you were in charge? Those kinds of things. So try to get an idea from them of, what it's like to work there. And, if there are any kind of red flags they might bring up. And something else totally fair to ask, and this could actually be asked of the hiring manager or future teammates, is what does onboarding look like for someone entering this role? So, you want to be looking for a place that's going to sort of set you up for success. So, if they have a good answer to onboarding and mentoring and those kinds of things once you're in the role, that's a really good sign. They're thinking about, you, especially if you're an early career person. You might take you a little bit more support to kind of get up and functional. So, and then the company itself. So when I ask questions, in times when I've been interviewing, when I ask questions about the company, I'm trying to learn about two things really. So one is values alignment. So, is this a company that, I'm going to be excited to kind of go to work for every day? So you might ask, how do they go about their business? What is the impact they're trying to make on the world? So quick story, back in 2010, I interviewed with Square, the company that makes the little card reader things used by a lot of small businesses. At that time, they were still small enough then that I had a call with the CEO, Jack Dorsey, to close me, which means for him to try to convince me to join the company. I asked him, what was the big idea? What was the change they were trying to make in the world? And I expected something inspiring about democratizing payments to enable more people to start small businesses, something like that. And instead, he started talking about how many users and how much revenue they expected to have by the end of the year. And I was so uninspired that I didn't take the job. The other thing that I'm looking for in these types of questions is financial stability. So, if you're interviewing at, a big company, a place like Apple or something like that, like they're clearly not going out of business. But if you're interviewing at a small startup, it's not a given. Like are they going to be around a year from now? So, it's fair to ask, how is the company doing? Like, are they on a good track? Are they growing? So a growing company too, kind of an added benefit of that is if they are growing, sometimes they can offer more opportunities than a company that's more stagnant. So, as you improve your skills, if the teams are growing and splitting off and making new teams, there might be opportunities for you to move up and move around and that kind of thing. So a couple of tips about how and when to ask your questions. So good interviewers will leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the interview for you to ask your questions. So, if you're in that situation, my biggest tip is basically just know the priority of your questions and ask them in that order. So, if there's a particular thing that we've talked about that's really important to you, make sure you get that one in first, because you don't know necessarily how long it's going to take them to answer and how much time how many of your questions you're going to get through. Now, if they don't leave time, or you don't get through all your questions, it's totally fair, and I would say even recommended, for you to email the recruiter afterwards to thank them for the interviewer's time and ask if they can pass along one or two of your sort of high priority questions. If the interviewer offers to take these follow-up questions directly, then by all means, email them directly and still CC the recruiter to keep them in the loop. So it's less common, but some interviewers will make it clear that they're open to the interview being more conversational. So what that means is that you're welcome to ask questions sort of throughout the course of the interview. And if that's the case, follow your curiosity and ask questions that show you're engaged with the topics. So for example, if they ask you a question about how you work with designers, an on-topic follow-up question could be to ask how developers and designers typically work together in the company. But keep in mind, even if they open the interview up to questions as you go, they likely have a set of questions they need to get through. So don't overdo it. Aim for asking maybe a question for every 2 or 3 questions that they ask you. So here's some tips maybe for interpreting answers to your questions. So one of the things about an interview is everyone's putting on a happy face. So you're trying to present yourself in their best light, and the company is too, the people interviewing you, because it makes sense. They want you to be excited about joining the team. So it can be hard sometimes to spot red flags, especially as someone who's new to the industry. Having been around this space for 20 years, I can I can kind of read between the lines a little bit, but if you're new to this, it might be harder. So one thing, one tip here, I guess, is just to try to read body language if you can. So, if the interviewer seems uncomfortable with, kind of answering the question, maybe you ask, like, what's your favorite thing about coming to work? And they're kind of, they kind of do this kind of thing. And then their answer is kind of non-committal or something. That might be a bad sign. It's tough. It's really tough to know because you don't really know these people very well. So the other thing I would suggest is that you take notes. So, you take notes on what their answers are, and that will allow you to kind of run it by someone else later to help you interpret their answers. So something we haven't talked about are, questions around salary and benefits and some of those kinds of things. So my advice to you is anything related to compensation is better asked of the recruiter that you're working with, or an HR or people operations representative. So many companies, hiring managers don't have a lot of direct control over compensation packages. So asking them about it could put them on the spot or make them feel uncomfortable. So on the other hand, it's literally the recruiter's job to discuss compensation with you. So they'll be fully comfortable and prepared for those questions. All right, so I think that's about it. Again, your homework is to go back, think about previous roles that you've had. What was good about them? What was maybe not so good about the environment you were in, or how the relationships you had with your teammates, the processes that they use, that kind of thing, and try to come up with questions that get at those things that are important to you. What would you sort of your ideal workplace look like? What would be the best possible relationship you could have with your manager, and see if you can come up with some questions that help you find out whether this company is going to be able to offer those things for you. All right, I think that's about it. I hope this is helpful, and I'll see you in the Q&A.